There is someone in your head right now. You know exactly who it is. Maybe they stopped texting back. Maybe they walked past you without saying a word. Maybe they chose someone else, said something cutting, or simply moved on with their life as if you had never been in it at all. And yet here you are, running the same conversation on a loop, imagining what you should have said, rehearsing what you might say, wondering what they are doing right now, wondering if they ever think about you the way you think about them. They almost certainly do not, and somehow that makes it worse. This is not weakness. This is not obsession. This is one of the oldest and most expensive programs your brain has ever run. And once you understand what it is actually doing and why it cannot seem to stop, the loop begins to make a different kind of sense. To understand why certain people get stuck in your head, you first have to understand what your brain is built to care about most. Not survival, not food, not shelter. Those matter, but they are downstream of something older and more fundamental. What your brain is built to care about, more than almost anything else, is your position inside a group. For the vast majority of human history, you did not survive alone. You survived as part of a band of somewhere between 50 and 150 people. This is the number Robin Dunbar at the University of Oxford identified after decades of research into social cognition and primate group sizes. He found that the human neocortex, the outer layer of the brain responsible for complex thought, is sized almost perfectly to track and manage relationships with roughly 150 people. Not more. That is not a coincidence. That is an architectural constraint built by evolution over millions of years, because for most of that time, those 150 people were your entire world. Inside that world, your position mattered enormously. If you were trusted, included, valued, and seen as someone worth keeping close, you had access to food during scarcity, to protection during danger, to partners, to information, to the warmth of the fire. If you were excluded, dismissed, or quietly pushed to the margins, your odds of surviving dropped fast. Rejection was not a social inconvenience in the ancient world. It was a death sentence delivered slowly. And your brain, shaped by that world, never forgot it. This is why the brain treats social exclusion like physical pain. In 2003, Naomi Eisenberger and Matthew Lieberman at UCLA ran a now-famous study using a simple virtual ball-tossing game called Cyberball. Participants played what they thought was a multiplayer game, and then, at a certain point, the other players simply stopped throwing the ball to them. They were excluded, silently, in a game with strangers, on a computer screen. And yet the brain scans showed activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which is the same region that lights up when you experience physical pain. Being left out of a digital ball game registered in the brain the same way a burn or a bruise does, not metaphorically, literally. The same neural circuitry, the same alarm. Now think about the person in your head. They are not a stranger in a digital game. They are someone who mattered to you. Someone whose opinion of you carried real weight. When they pulled away, went silent, or made it clear that you were not a priority, your brain did not receive that as a minor social inconvenience. It received it as a threat signal, an alarm. And alarms, by design, are very hard to ignore. But that still does not explain the loop. It does not explain why you keep returning to the same person, the same moment, the same conversation, long after the initial sting should have faded. For that, you need to understand something about how your brain processes unresolved social information. The brain has a fundamental drive to make sense of things. Psychologists call this the need for cognitive closure, a concept developed by Ari Kruglansky at the University of Maryland, who spent decades studying how the mind handles ambiguity. The brain does not like open loops. When it encounters a situation it cannot resolve, it flags that situation as unfinished, and it returns to it, again and again, searching for the resolution that never comes. This is why a song that stops before the final chord feels unbearable. This is why cliffhangers work. This is why you can remember an interrupted task far better than a completed one. a phenomenon first documented by the Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik in the 1920s, and now known as the Zeigarnik Effect. The person in your head is an open loop. Something happened between you or did not happen, and your brain never received the signal that the situation was resolved. There was no clean ending, no explanation, no moment of mutual understanding that allowed your mind to file the experience away and move on. And so it keeps the file open. It keeps returning to it. It keeps trying to find the answer that was never given. This process has a biological function. In the ancient social world, understanding why someone withdrew from you was not a luxury. It was critical intelligence. If a member of your group started avoiding you, you needed to know why. Were you in danger of being expelled? Had you violated a social norm without realizing it? Was there something you could do to repair the relationship before it cost you your standing? The brain that could detect these shifts early, analyze them obsessively, and course-correct quickly was the brain that survived. You are descended from those brains. The obsessive loop is not a malfunction. It is a very old safety system that has not yet received the update. There is another layer beneath this, and it involves something neuroscientists call the brain's reward prediction system. When you experience a connection with someone, your brain registers it as a reward. Dopamine is released. A pattern is encoded. Your brain begins to predict that this person is a source of positive signal. And then, if that signal suddenly stops or becomes unpredictable, something strange happens. The dopamine system does not simply switch off. It becomes hyperactivated. It starts searching harder for the signal it was trained to expect. This is the same mechanism behind slot machines and social media notifications. Intermittent, unpredictable reward is more compelling to the brain than consistent reward. It creates a seeking state that is almost impossible to voluntarily exit. Robert Sapolsky at Stanford University, who has spent decades studying the neuroscience of stress and reward, has documented this process in detail. When the reward is uncertain, when sometimes it comes and sometimes it does not, the dopamine system fires more intensely than it does for a guaranteed reward. Uncertainty does not dampen the pursuit. It amplifies it. This is why the person who was sometimes warm and sometimes cold, sometimes present and sometimes absent, is so much harder to stop thinking about than someone who was consistently kind. The inconsistency trained your brain to keep seeking. The loop is not irrational. It is the predictable output of a dopamine system doing exactly what it evolved to do. And then there is the question of identity, because the people who end up stuck in our heads are rarely strangers. They are people who saw something in us, or failed to see something in us that we cared deeply about. They are people whose perception of us became, for a period of time, part of how we perceived ourselves. When someone who held a mirror to your sense of self suddenly takes that mirror away, you are left not just missing them, but missing a version of yourself that only existed in their presence. This is not neediness. This is how human identity works. We are social creatures. Our sense of who we are is always partly constructed through the eyes of others. Losing that reflection is genuinely disorienting. The philosopher Charles Taylor wrote about this as the fundamentally dialogical nature of human identity. We do not come to know ourselves in isolation. We come to know ourselves in relationship, through the responses of others, through the ways we are seen and named and valued by the people we allow to matter to us. When one of those people disappears, part of the conversation that was building your sense of self disappears with them. And the mind, searching for completion, keeps trying to finish the conversation. So you replay the moments. You draft the messages you will never send. You imagine the conversation where finally you say exactly the right thing and they understand, and the loop closes. You are not doing this because you are weak or obsessed or incapable of letting go. You are doing this because your brain is running an ancient program designed to protect your place in the group, resolve a dangerous ambiguity, recover an interrupted reward signal, and complete a conversation that helped define who you are. The question is not why you cannot stop thinking about them. The question is what you do with a brain that was built for a world of 150 people, where every social rupture carried life or death stakes, and is now running that same software in a world where the person who stopped texting you is perfectly fine, living their life, probably not thinking about you at all. The answer is not to fight the loop. Fighting the loop feeds it. Every time you suppress a thought, you trigger a rebound effect that makes the thought return stronger, a phenomenon well documented by Daniel Wegner at Harvard, who famously showed that telling someone not to think about a white bear makes them think about a white bear almost constantly. The loop does not close by force. The loop closes by completion, not the imaginary completion of a conversation that will never happen, real completion, new information, new experience, new social signal that tells the ancient safety system that you are not, in fact, being expelled from the group, that you are still valued, still connected, still here. Your brain is not broken. It is loyal to a version of the world that no longer exists. And somewhere underneath all that noise, underneath the replaying and the rehearsing and the quiet ache of someone taking up space in your head, there is a very old system doing its job, watching out for you, trying to bring you home. The person in your head right now, they are proof that your brain still knows how much connection matters. That has always been the oldest thing about you.